say something after my provocative stuff.
So here's my reaction to you. I get worried about your language for how it's going to create true transformation rather than more polarization.
What happens if you've given up on the people that some people think can be transformed, and you want to defeat that block of voters with black women and gay people and Hispanics and younger people, and basically just say, look, my job is to tell you how bad it will be when these Reconstructionist, theonomist Christian evangelicals like Mike Pence fully get their way. They're a lot more dangerous than you think, and that's my view. So I've given up on reforming that group. I'd like to peel a few voters away, but then after that, defeat them soundly at the polls and move on to the rest of American history. What do you think?
I think scarcity creates more scarcity, and I think believing in just how much people can be transformed, and I think your story is a story of that, is the way that we transform our country. And people call me an idealist, but what they don't realize is I grew up in the spaces that you're talking about. And I am actually a pessimist who wants to be an optimist, so I'm a realist. And the reality is, as a therapist, I've also gotten to see firsthand that people can go through incredible transformation when they are invited in humane ways to engage life and their family and themselves in more connection and empathy and equity. And that doesn't mean that I disagree with you about the changes that we can make and need to make related to human rights and women's rights. I mean, I'm a female entrepreneur that's a millennial, of course, and I'm a queer identifying woman. And I live in much of the discrimination. I mean, I lost everything when I was 25, including leaving my job because if I chose to engage in behavior that they disagreed with, I could be terminated on the spot. And that to them was a healthy theology. And I've had people not speak to me for years and choose to not do business with me because of simply their view of my identity or their interpretation of my humanity. I've also been uninvited from circles because I'm too privileged. And I've gotten to be invited to understand my own understanding of the racism that my tribe has carried and what that means in my humanity now. And so I think everything that you're talking about is very real, but I also think the language that you're using creates more scarcity and division rather than invitation and transformation.
You've just disagreed with me on my own blog site and post, and I post this because I'm that kind of guy. All kidding aside, I actually not only hope you're right, I think I could be wrong on this. Because I have had a long history with these guys and am somewhat of a survivor as you are, but it's a different kind because I helped engineer this mess. And so I feel a slightly more pressing sense of personal responsibility for undoing it. And if it takes essentially demolishing the world I helped build, so be it. It's a different perspective, but I hope you're right. And I think you may be, because my lens is dark when it comes to this subject.
And I told you earlier, and I'll tell you again, I think that you are a glass of fresh water for a lot of people like me. To see you take the ownership that you do, to see you boldly say the things that you say, says a lot to someone like me. And I don't want that to be missed.
Yeah.
And I think that there, ironically enough, is something so core to the Jesus story that believes in the abundance of love. Mm-hmm. That there's something there that has pulse.
Yes.
And
you think it can still be appealed to.
I think something can happen with it. And I am an entrepreneur that even builds business models around ethos, because I believe that humans want to get around equity and empathy. And in fact, I think that's where industry is headed, even from that standpoint. So yeah, it's not just from an idealistic hope. I put my life and my vocation and my energy behind this idea.
Where can people get in touch with you?
So I have a personal website, heatherlundy.org.
How do you spell it?
Heather, Lundy is LUNDY.org. That's a great way to get in touch and also learn about the different companies that I'm creating and some writing that I'm doing and
good.
Invitations.
Well, I hope people do. I kind of agree with what you had said, except for one thing. They voted for this sucker in the primaries. when they had people like Jeb Bush, a conservative Roman Catholic, and others. I think these guys have a hard right fascist core that people don't want to admit is there, and they were ready for their own little strong man. They had plenty of options. You know, I despise Ted Cruz, but he's the real article when it comes to evangelical. And he's not he wouldn't have been a porn president that they would be justifying. Jeb Bush is a very, from an evangelical point, godly conservative man. They had options. I get why they didn't want to vote for Hillary. But the fact that he went through the primary process and these guys came in cheering for him tells me all I need to know about white evangelicals today. Do you want to defend them a little, or do you agree that I have a point there? Or I'm not arguing, but just like, what do you say?
You know, I think you have a point, because I think that you've been in worlds and in circles that even in the exclusive spaces I've been, that I haven't been in those same rooms. And I've been more at the community level, where I've seen the power of groupthink and the power of a tribal-centric perspective and the power of a systematic theology that almost builds up this as a natural outcome, even from the ways that it creates denial or subconscious responses or reactivity. So it's not that I disagree with you, but I think that I come from a different perspective.
Yeah, and I would just say I maybe, you know, I'm whatever I am, 67. No, I'm 66. Damn it, I just lost a year. But and you're younger. We come from that evangelical background, but the fact of the matter is, having gone through the cycle of the religious right in the 70s and 80s, these guys had many chances to do better than a Donald Trump. You know, they made Ronald Reagan president, and a lot of people don't like Ronald Reagan, but he wasn't Donald Trump. He wasn't a con artist, complete liar, etc. But they have gone for something lower than any expectation would have been, and I just think the evangelicals have literally sold their birthright and now are the enemy of American democracy. I don't see them as friends anymore of even this country. I think they represent an anarchic fifth column who puts a strong man in power who himself is a con artist, and they really now, I think, have to be held accountable. Evangelicalism is the problem. It's not going to ever be the solution in this country. It's lost, I think, all credibility. Now, that's a dark view, but do you have any comment on that?
So the comment that I actually have is a question, because something that I know about your story is you were that person
right
at one time.
Right.
So what caused you to go from there to here?
Well, and this is stupid and facetious and extreme, and it's been a long day, and you know, so I'll couch it in that way. But having been in Hitler Youth myself and been a leader there, I think I understand neo-Nazis of the type that love Trump, and that includes your gun-toting evangelical, open carry, NRA member buffoon who really is now on the fascist edge of American culture. Now, that's not all evangelicals. That may not even be most of them, but you know, when you look back at American history and you realize that most lynch mobs were led by evangelical pastors who prayed before they hanged black men, it gives you a perspective on where this movement has always been in many horrible ways. And I think that bubbled to the surface post their racism against Obama and the 8-year slow motion lynching they gave him with the lies, the birther movement, and all the rest. And when Trump came along, he was their boy from the beginning. And when you look at the percentage numbers of how he kicked the butts of all the more legitimate Republican candidates, I think it's a slam dunk. They wanted this guy.
So I have something to add about why people from my tribe that I grew up in the evangelical church voted the way that they did. And in a lot of ways, I think it's because they didn't feel like they had another choice. Whether it was the morality in their mind of other candidates or the legislation they thought that would get passed that felt antithetical to their faith. In a lot of ways, it speaks to the disconnection from a psychological and familial standpoint of their universe is insulated, and it felt like there wasn't another option. And in a lot of ways, my advocacy in my world, whether it's from my understanding of psychology or my desire to stay connected to these communities, is to help invite new language and also understand their world so that we can connect towards new thought rather than just keeping our insulated universes.
How may I atone? I ask myself these questions silently and inwardly. How may I atone for helping to poison America with certainty addiction? How do I defend my grandchildren against the religious rights juggernaut I helped create? How do I reject what my parents stood for, fundamentalist fanaticism, and yet honor the love they gave me? How can I help my grandchildren stumble upon the goodness of life before they're sold towering mounds of brain-damaging garbage? How do I help save the world? And what kind of deluded messianic fool am I to believe that this is even possible?